would like to present the presentation in four parts. The first one will be, first of all, why was there so much upheaval in 2009 about the Chinese claim with respect to the $9 fine. We'll do so by telling a little bit about the content of the claim and what the possible juridical implications are. Thirdly, we'll have a little bit about we'll look down at the issue of the map, because the claim was presented by a short statement, but the short statement was accompanied by a map, and it was the map which triggered quite a response. And we'll see how in international law maps can have an influence on the development. And then finally, we'll try to reach some conclusions. All this in 15 minutes, so I think we better start going. Okay, so there were two letters which were addressed by China to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and they were both addressed as a reaction to something which happened in 2009. It happened not because countries had a free choice of determining the time period, no. There was a strict limit of time that Vietnam, as well as Malaysia and Vietnam, had to introduce their claims about the extended continental shelves. They both did it, one joint claim and then a second claim by Vietnam by itself. And when they did, China reacted. And China reacted by means of two separate letters, but the content of both letters was exactly the same. And this claim, which we will address today, so it's a very small area, but I think it's a very important one, because it's the first time in international law that China has made public use of this map. In the past, it has remained, I would say, an internal matter, but for the first time, they rely on the map for public purposes. Now, what does the content of the statement of China say? It states, and I quote, "China has indisputable sovereignty over the islands of the South China Sea and the adjacent waters, and enjoys sovereignty or sovereign rights and jurisdiction over the relevant waters, as well as the seabed and subsoil thereof." And then, between parentheses, they add to it, "See attached map." And the map attached looks as follows, and then they continue, "The above position is consistently held by the Chinese government and is widely known by the international community." It is this map, which is called the $9 line. It has many names, but in fact, which stirred quite some difficulties in the international community, because according to international rules of the law of the sea, it's very difficult to make any specific use of it. The importance, nevertheless, is that for the first time it was used on an international level. As stated in the past, China relied on the map very often in bilateral negotiations, but never did they do so in an outspoken multilateral framework. What then are the possible claims which this map may mean in practice? Before we do so, there is an important difference that we have to make. And the first one is that there is a difference to be made between, on the one hand, government positions, and on the other hand, what writers write about different things. Even in communist countries, I think the government has an easy task, or very often relies on what scientists do, not specifically to have to take position themselves. They let it float, and when it's according to their wishes, it's okay. And then after a while they can make use of it if they want to or they don't, but they certainly don't have to make a claim specifically themselves. Secondly, with respect to China, we also have to make a clear distinction between, on the one hand, what the Republic of China says, and what, on the other hand, the People's Republic of China pretends, because with respect to this claim, it's not always exactly the same. There are four possible interpretations, and we'll address them one by one. And the first one is that all the waters enclosed by the line which we saw on the map are historic waters. Historic waters, or that China at least has historic claim with respect to them. If you look at for a long time, the official position, I think, of the Republic of China was specifically this one, and they made some very strong statements in this respect. Today, apparently, they have a little bit diminished the tone, but nevertheless, it shows that legal title with respect to historic titles might have an impact on this water area. The legal analysis is very difficult from an international point of view. It's very difficult to sustain because historic title, especially with respect to waters, normally concerns waters which are very close to the coastline, and it is very difficult to imagine how such a vast area can become a historic title claim. Especially if you look what the United Nations Secretariat's Legal Office wrote on the topic in 1960. But we can keep that for the discussion. A second possible interpretation has to do with the, I would say, insular claims. It means you don't look at the water area, but you do look at the islands which generate the water areas. And in this aspect, the claim translates as follows. Namely that it is because the line simply tries to capture all the islands over which China has a sovereignty claim. So it doesn't have to do anything with the waters, but only with the land within these dashes. Here, if we look at the legal analysis, I think I simply refer to what Chimie will be telling us a little bit later on, because this has to do with the status of territory, and I'm only dealing with the consequences of that, namely the maritime issues which come afterwards. Anyway, putting a claim, such a claim on a map, it's very difficult in international law to have any legal value, because a map by itself cannot, and I repeat, cannot constitute a legal title. And this is stated in Burkina Faso or Mali in 1986 in the International Court of Justice, where they say that this has been the definitive statement on the issue of maps, and the important parts are that they cannot constitute territorial title, and also that sometimes they can do, but only when it's a clear intent of the parties, and you can only have a clear intent of the parties when, for instance, they make the treaty itself makes reference to the maps. And then, of course, it can have something more than simply an illustrative purpose. If we then look at the third claim, that is that you look again at the insular claim, namely at the islands, but this time you consider the maritime areas considered as starting from the islands. And this third hypothesis states that this line, the 9-dotted line, it's simply the delimitation between the maritime zones generated by these islands and the maritime zone generated by the neighboring states. However, this is a unilateral claim, and unilateral claims are, in international law, is of course, it's not determinative. You have to have at least agreement if you want to have a maritime boundary established by means of such a claim. And then finally, the last kind of claim that you can have, interpretation given to this line, is this computer term, which is WYSIWYG, and stands for what you see is what you get. And if you take a closer look at the lines which are on the map and you make them a little bit bigger, you will see that the lines depicting the territorial boundary between China and Vietnam on the top, it's exactly the same as the kind of line that they use for making the claims with respect to these islands. So if you look at this, it appears that these are national boundaries. And it reminds me, I did my PhD on the Arctic, and it reminds me of the Soviet claim with respect to the sector theory. They also on maps produced lines which were identical to the land boundaries on that. And so this substantially, it's a new claim, but in fact very much resembles the historical claim, because it means that this is your state boundary, and all the maritime zones you start measuring outside of this area. What then if we come to maps? What is the what is the value of these maps with respect to international law? How can you line these maps if you want to prove a claim? Well, here I think normally adjudicators, arbiters, judges are given very wide discretion. But in this very wide discretion, what judges have done is that they have given maps only limited effect. And we try to apply it all times at the $9 line as we have illustrated on the map. First of all, there is this very cautious approach with respect to maps in general. As I said, if we return to Burkina Faso and Mali, they stated that no great legal value can be given. Then corroborative evidence, it means that it doesn't give you a presumption. It doesn't even give you a juris tantum presumption, so it means, in fact, it doesn't give you any kind of legal value at all. And especially then, if you have problems with the map, it even further diminishes the quality of the probative value of maps. First of all, in the case, it was about the land boundary, but it concerned the river. And here the ICJ also stated in 1986 that if you have incompatible maps, of course, it diminishes the importance of it. Now, if you look at the EU line, once again, or the $9 line, it started with 11 dashes, 2 disappeared in 1953, nobody knows exactly why. So the 2 dashes in the Gulf of Tonkin disappeared. And then if you look at today, some maps depict 10 dashes, with one more close to Taiwan. So you go from 11, you come to 9, and then it goes to 10. It means that there is apparently a contradiction as to the exact nature of the claim. Secondly, what also diminishes the value of maps is when they are incoherent or ambiguous. Again, we can refer to a statement of an arbitration in 1998, the Eritrea-Yemen arbitration, and they say that, of course, you have to have a clear attribution of what you mean by the lines, and if you don't, dotted lines very often do not have any value whatsoever. And of course, the EU line is such a dotted line. There is no legend in the map depicting what they really are, these lines, and moreover, if you look at the work of the International Hydrographic Office, where of course they have, especially when you put things on maps, everything has a specific meaning. The way in which China depicts these 9 dotted lines on the map is nowhere to be found in this long list of all kinds of symbols that you can put on maps. And what is most important, of course, is that China itself is a member of the International Hydrographic Office. So they very well know what all these different lines and dots that you place on maps means, but what they put on the map in 2009 doesn't resemble any of these things. So it means that they remain very, very vague.